I look around the room here, fantastic. I'm not just looking at the amazing architecture, I look at the people in the room and I think, wow, this is a pretty diverse group of people. But as a psychologist, I know that the problem we have with diversity is in our heads. So we all sit down and just look at who you're sitting next to. You've probably completely unconsciously chosen to sit next to someone who in some way makes you feel quite safe and comfortable.
When I first came to the bar, I was told that the pecking order was white male, black male, white female, and guess who's the bottom of the pile? I hoped that, 30 plus years later, that the pecking order might have changed, and it hasn't. So if you have women of a higher calibre going in with greater skills, and then somehow a metamorphosis takes place of these very talented women, so that you only have about 1% of them at the top, and 99% of those who achieve are male, something tells me statistically you might have a bit of a problem in terms of equality.
Right. For me, I entered a very male-dominated industry business. I joined a very Dickensian practice where all the partners except me were members of the clubs in St James's, and obviously I thought I would be told to go as soon as I told them that I was going to change, and it was a big eye-opener to find that actually they had no problem with it and they allowed me to.
When was that?
Transition. That was 14 years ago.
14 years ago.
So just to say to those of you who don't want diversity, and Andrew and Jeffrey are Jewish and I'm black, and I'm sure that had nothing to do whatsoever with our rejection. However, we went on to make a significant contribution. So one of the things I think to say to companies is you reject talent at your own risk.
I'm an Indian girl, and I don't often think about it, but trying to be a corporate lawyer in the city was something I thought, gosh, this is traditionally white male at Oxbridge. I'm Indian, I'm female, I'm not Oxbridge, am I going to get in? And I wonder if that's sometimes my perception, my barriers that can haunt me, and I've got to overcome that, and I'm very interested in your opinion on that.
I think that's a very good question, because if you view your whole life through a frame of I'm gay, black, Asian, you will be interpreting everything that happens to you through that pair of glasses. It's very interesting. I think Dan Ariely, in his book Predictably Irrational, talks about a test where they got a group of Asian women into a room. They did this a few times. And the first few times, they got them to believe that they were there because they were Asian, stereotype good at maths. And they gave them a maths quiz. And then the next few times, different people, they got them to think they were there because they were women, not so quantitative. And they gave them the same maths test. And when the Asian women thought they were there because they were Asian, they got systematically better maths scores than when they were there thinking they were there as women, which is a very interesting playing to the... And so that is a very interesting dimension of the problem. Thank you.
I think one of the barriers, I've seen a lot of progression on diversity and inclusion throughout the industry, particularly at Standard Chartered. I see a couple of things that are coming through that are working against that in the recruitment practices recently. One is LinkedIn, because we see our talent acquisition team basically being told to cut costs. And so they are like, oh, well, let's just go out to your network. And that network is exactly, go and find somebody who looks after yourself. Or who's that bloke you got on with on the trading floor who works really well? Okay, well, let's go and get him, because we know he does a good job and he's a good bloke. So that's really, really working against it. And then I think, likewise, what you see, unfortunately, is sometimes there are some very boutique diversity and inclusion recruitment providers out there, but they charge more for their services than the standard ones do. So I think what I'd really like to say is, okay, so every time we cut costs when we're hiring people because we've used LinkedIn and we've not used a recruitment provider, and every time we've chosen a recruitment provider who has not got their diversity slate appropriate, what actually is that cost to the organisation?
And there are lots of old boys networks. There's the Oxbridge one, there's the Oxford one versus the Cambridge one, there's that blah, blah. And so we all belong to affinity groups, to old boy networks, which is not the same as affinity group. And there's a point about we are comfortable with people like ourselves. And I think that's okay for a club. It's when that spills over into business performance. And so I think the lady who came up before is onto something here. If we can somehow separate what we're comfortable with knocking the lights out in the business, we might be able to find an answer to the big question.
If we look at where development is coming, it's Asia and Africa. And more people want people who look like them. And guess what? The people who look like them aren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males.
I just wanted to ask the panel what they think why there is so much prejudice against hiring ex-offenders. I mean, I think threat, bigots, fear of the unknown, middle management, HR, but it's the last bastion of discrimination that people can discriminate against ex-offenders. In no way could they discriminate against somebody in a wheelchair or the colour of your skin or your sexuality.
In the prison service, and the Baroness will, I'm sure, agree, there's definitely a moral judgment about the good people and the bad people. And what I learned from my time in the prison service was that there, but for the grace of God, is any single one of us making any single decision. And I find sometimes I think it's the same for all diversity issues, but it definitely comes out in offenders and in disability. What you see is the issues and the potential issues and the fear and the risks rather than the potential.
Because I think we've got two sides now, this middle management challenge, and there may be many more sides. One is a fear of the unknown and the not being sure what's going to happen to me and voting for Christmas. The other one is a fear. And so for odd people that you don't understand and don't like, gay people, whatever they happen to be, that's a funny sort of fear because they're not a physical threat, they're not a reputational threat. There's another fear, which if I let somebody in who's been in prison and I know they've been in prison, then they may do something all over again. And that's a different kind of fear.
How many people in this room know incompetent senior women? And I think we will have real equality when there are so many incompetent women in periods in positions of power as we have incompetent men. Then we will have equality.
If you need to ask the question, and it's a common question, I'm sure, about change or leave, then you've already got the answer. You're not up for the fight. You're not the crusader type. Find out the kind of personality you are and go with that. You don't have to change the world all upon yourself. Somebody else, hopefully, will come along and do it. The lady who was the lawyer, just touching back to that point, you don't just represent yourself, and some of you may just want to represent yourselves, whether you're gay or Indian or whatever ethnic minority. And sometimes you don't want to. You just want to be selfish and you want to say, you know what, I'm going to have a quiet life. I'm going to not take on the fights and the challenges. But for those of you who are up for it, who are up for the challenge, and recognize that you're not just going to become a partner at that law firm for yourself, you're going to become it for the next 100 Indian girls, or just for everybody else who didn't have it from Oxbridge or whatever else group it is. Position yourself as that crusader. That's your personal story. That'll get you through it. And the greatest thing is you'll actually get a purpose in life far, far better than being a lawyer.